Oh, we're live. We are live with Rational Empiricism. We're going to go over some things that we missed previously. So, what do you got in mind?
Well, first I'd like to start off with I think I don't know the exact date yet, but I think me and SFT are having another a round 2 basically on nested hierarchies.
Okay. How do you think the first one went?
I didn't get as much in there as I thought I could, but that's kind of why I'm gonna try and improve my slideshow, for instance.
Okay.
And that's kind of some other stuff I want to talk to, just some basic philo stuff.
Okay.
So I guess I was going over some of the emails that I've just in general gotten about philosophy of science and stuff like that. And one thing that I think I hadn't seen before or kind of realized before, but that kind of makes sense a little bit now, is the idea that science is not based around. Okay, I don't want to say it's not based around. I want to say it's not centered around objective truth. Rather, it's centered around figuring out how the world works as best we can. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. It's I think science is overall not too concerned with the philosophy of science.
Right.
Because scientists are kind of busy people, busy in the details, right?
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, and then there's the whole other group of scientists, you know, the guys that are doing like overall philosophy of biology and information. There's those guys, and they do a lot of stuff. And, you know, it's just, I don't know. When I hear philosophy of science, I get this dismissive feeling right away. Like, who cares?
Right. It works, so we must be doing something right.
We don't need no stinking philosophy. You know, that's sort of the, I mean, and that's not actually true. We do need that stuff at the top, but for the most part, like what I do day to day, I mean, even this idea about, you know, is evolution true? That isn't what I deal with every day. You know, when I'm studying something, I'm not dealing with that question at all. If I find out it's not, I'll find out, right?
Right.
I mean, if I prove evolution, hell, Nobel Prize. You know?
Right. I mean, well, then there's going to be some snarky philosophers out there who are going to say you can't prove anything in science.
Right. Yeah.
Which of course I guess you can kind of agree with them, but like I feel like, and this is kind of what I want to talk about, which is basically I feel like this kind of relates to naturalism, which I know you guys and Danny have been talking about recently. I don't know if it's the same kind of naturalism, but I feel like if I can share an example that one professor in one email shared with me, which I think is a really good example, is basically, okay, so imagine you have this church in Mississippi and a bunch of amputees come in. Okay, I feel like I've shared this one before, but I just like this example.
A bunch of what?
Amputees, sorry.
Oh, amputees, okay.
And they start praying to them, or not praying to them, praying for God to heal them, and anointing them with a certain kind of oil, and probably some other stuff going on there. And then doctors, of course, come to the church and look, oh, hey, they're healing people using magic. And scientists, of course, would want to try and narrow down what exactly is going on, right? They wouldn't just say it's magic, basically.
Right. What kind of oil are they using? They do experiments, right?
Right. Yeah. Experiment. Sorry, I got distracted for a second. So basically, what they would do is, like you said, do experiments, um, and ask different questions about what's going on, basically. Um, but the thing is, in, I guess, what you might call a worst case scenario, where you don't find out what's going on, instead you find, okay, you need to pray, you need to wait, you need to, or that's probably in the wrong order. You need to pray, you need to anoint the limb, and then you wait. I don't feel like anyone would say that that's a very deep understanding of what's going on. But I think this is kind of my point, that if that were indeed to happen, which I don't think it happens as often, but if it were to happen, it would still be science, because we're figuring out exactly what's going on. So we could call this the law of what happens when you pray and anoint a person's limb.
Yeah, and we would study the hell out of it and try to figure out, what could we do with it?
Right,
what are the
exactly.
limits? That sort of thing. I mean, it's not good to make God mad at us, but I think that would show that naturalism was false, the kind of naturalism that I prescribe to anyway, and that would be fine. Then we'd know that, and it's like, okay, so what I would want to know,
philosophical naturalism, just to clarify.
yeah, philosophical naturalism. What I would want to know next is what else is going on out there. How many instances of this are there? What can we do with it?
Right.
And I mean, if these guys hit upon the right kind of oil and the right prayer, and maybe the right church or something, how can we extend that? Can we cure cancer?
Oh, that would be awesome. Well, like, that's kind of gets into the other scenario, where basically, okay, this might happen. So in this case, the supernatural may or may not be real, in which case we learn something, which is basically related to application of whatever it is where they're doing in that church. And then the other scenario, of course, would be, maybe there's some weird germs basically in the oil that they're using in it, and it helps
Right.
the cells heal faster, basically. I think it's the example you used. And I kind of like his point on this, which is basically, no matter what you do, basically you're going to learn something. So it doesn't really matter if the supernatural is real. In both cases, you're going to, I was kind of thinking about this the other day, you're going to come up with patterns, basically, because that's all really science is about, right?
Yeah.
Just coming up with patterns about the natural world.
Yeah, I think I'd vary the kind of oil. Then I would vary the location, find out if the same prayer works, and then I would map out the prayer and try to simulate that. But rather than a prayer, I would have a machine create the audio, so that everything was the same. And it's like, okay, it doesn't work. It only works if we pray. A human prays.
Right.
Then we would know something about naturalism is probably false. And it'd be like, okay, what's next, guys? It's like,
right. Well, I think this was kind of the point, that, like, if even in that scenario, where something kind of funky is going on, like we don't discredit the supernatural, right? Like,
no, it would be interesting as hell. I don't know.
right.
Oh, Dessel was asking if I was napping. Do I fucking look like I was napping? No, I was making dinner. Anyway.
Oh,
no,
well, I was going to say, like,
does it look like I was napping?
A little bit.
Does it? Yeah, my my ex-wife
you just look tired is all.
My ex-wife said I looked tired, and I questioned her about it, and she said, your eyes are red. And it's like, my eyes are always red because I put in 4 different eye drops 3 times a day. So that's 12 eye drops a day. And yeah, my eyes are red. And I end up looking tired. But yeah, I'm a little bit tired, but not too bad. So
yeah, that's good. Yeah, I was. Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, just to wrap up that thought, that like I feel that like the experiments you were talking about earlier, like okay, does it depend on the noise being made or the specific
Yeah.
frequency of the audio, basically, like
Right.
he even talked about this, like, and I think you would agree that it doesn't matter. Sorry, even if you do those experiments, you don't presuppose that nothing supernatural is going on. Basically,
Right.
you're just trying to figure things out, because I was kind of thinking about this the other day, and I kind of thought about science as, okay, we were born into this weird yet wonderful world, where we didn't know what the heck was going on, but we saw certain
Right.
patterns, and we tried to figure those out and cope with them the best we could, whether that be through applying what we knew to what we don't know and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, like, do you kind of have the same vision of science?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an extension of, like I always say, my first science experiment was when I was 1 month old and I was flailing my arms around and I poked myself in the eye. That was my first science experiment. And it's like, okay, I don't want to do that again. So, and then I learned how to flail more accurately. And then from that, from how we put together reality, and then we learn a lot of common sense things like how to use a crescent wrench or how to use a screwdriver, or how to wash ourselves and shit like that. And then we go from that, and science, I think, is just an extension of that, and it's a smooth extension. It doesn't have to be some really rigid thing with all these rules, and we have to rule this out and rule that out. I mean, there are good practices that we've developed over the years, but it's just an extension of common sense about how you tune into the world and find out what's going on.
Yeah,
And
I think the mistake is that people often think of science as almost too objective, when
right,
it's not really objective and it's not really subjective. It's
right,
kind of a mix of both. I
yeah,
feel like it would lean towards objectivity, but that's just because we've had a while to figure this out, basically, and kind of tweak the methods.
yeah. Yeah, we'd want to, like, on the limb thing, we'd want to find out all kinds of things, like what else can we do? What else can we heal? What are the parameters? What if we take a non-believer or somebody who just doesn't believe this shit is real at all, thinks it's a scam, have him say the prayer? Does that make a difference? And then
Right.
I'd go from there and I'd say, okay, so we found out that only saying a prayer, a believer saying a prayer, causes the limb to grow back with the oil. He has to have the right oil, right?
Right.
And we find that out, and I'd be okay. So now I know that the mind is not material. That there's something supernatural about minds and belief, right? So the next thing I'd want to know, I put people in CAT scans, and I want to find out how did these two different worlds connect? What are the
Right.
parameters of the connection from this one realm of mind to this realm of brain? And how much of the brain can we get rid of without affecting the mind, right? I mean, I'd have a hell of a good time coming up with
Yeah,
experiments.
I think one thing people might mistake with that, though, is that if that kind of experiment were indeed to happen, which I don't know of any actual cases of that haven't been figured out, or well, first of all, do you know of any cases of like what we're talking about?
No, I've heard stories, and like I had a childhood friend who supposedly got up in church and spoke in tongues,
Hmm.
and he was kind of legendary. And but he was the kind of kid that he would do that just for attention, right?
Hmm.
I knew him. He was ADD and crazy, and that's the only miracle I've ever heard of. And I heard ghost stories, but I haven't heard of anybody healing anybody or anything. I mean, not even, I don't even know of anybody that got lucky, and recovered from cancer. Well, I got one friend that recently did, but
Hmm.
it was pretty obvious, pancreatic cancer. And it's pretty obvious how they caught it early, and that's why he's still alive. I mean, I
Right.
haven't heard of anything like that. And when I do hear about it, I'm like, okay, if it's repeatable, and if this is consistent, then goddamn it, film the limb growing back. Get 2020 and Inside Edition and CNN over there and show me, and then I'll start believing it, and it's like, until then, no, I'm not buying it.
Right. And then they kind of incorporate like a bit of, is it ad hoc or is it special pleading? Like, oh, it's like you're a skeptic. My psychic powers don't work on you.
Yeah. Oh, that one. Yeah, I love that one. Like, you really got to believe, otherwise it doesn't work. It's
Right.
like, okay.
Oh, you're roboting slightly.
Oh, really? So what the hell's going on here? I got nothing running. I wonder if I'm roboting. Am I roboting out there in public?
Yeah, maybe it's just me. I'm not sure.
It could be. Hopefully somebody in chat will tell me. We got Scott and Dessel in chat. So, okay. So, I mean, that all makes sense. And I don't think it's all that complicated figuring out, what methodological naturalism is.
Right.
That is just a method where we look to natural causes first, everything we can, right? And if we rule all that out, then fine. Whatever's left over is magic, and that's okay too. But so far, we got a pretty goddamn good track record with methodological naturalism, figuring out how things work.
Right. I think one thing I might disagree with is the fact that, like, in examples we've talked about so far, like, we know a specific process is going on. That does not, however, imply that a God exists, for instance. It's kind of a big leap, basically. So I feel like I'd slightly disagree there, that we need metaphysical evidence, whatever that may be, and this kind of gets into the whole realm of what's metaphysical and not, so I'm not going to harp on that. But
yeah, then we need to know which God. Then if it turned out that only the Bible, if you had your hand on the Bible when you prayed, instead of growing a new limb, the guy just, turned into ash, just roasted spontaneously, incinerated. Well, then we better try the Muslims' book, whatever that is. It's Quran. Is that what they call it? Quran?
Yeah.
Quran? Yeah, that one. And if he turned into ash, well, then we better talk to the Buddhists, or somebody.
Well, like, say for instance he didn't turn to ash, then maybe it would be some deeper law that's going on with religious books. That's kind of an argument someone could make, probably.
Yeah, to get me to the point where I actually read the Bible and followed that shit would take a lot of doing. It'd take a lot of testing before I would decide that, the Bible, because it just seems so unlikely that a book, a collection of manuscripts from, and it's not a book, it's a collection of manuscripts from history that was put together. I mean, all of that, to believe that all of that somehow was a pattern for life, that was a real stretch for me. I just can't buy that one. I don't know why anybody does.
Yeah, I think people are giving or not giving humans enough credit for being as creative as they are. Where it's weird. In some situations we're pretty creative, in some situations we're as dumb as rocks. Right.
I'm amazed at how dumb people can be. Like, even in traffic, in the other day with the black ice on the road, and people are driving 70, and they're all clustered around a semi tractor trailer, and that guy in that tractor trailer was probably thinking, "You idiots! If I jackknife, you're all dead." and they're in a hurry to get to work, and it's like, are you thinking at all? It's like, it's just the oddest thing how badly we think sometimes, or when we get into a fight at a grocery store over the last tomato. I mean, like, and then you come home and you got your dog and your cat, and they get into a little tiff and start snarling at each other and having a fight. It's that kind of dumb, right? And you just saw it at the grocery store with human beings fighting over a tomato. And it's like, how far have we come?
Yeah. Hey, man, that's Tuesday for my dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a regular day.
So the other thing, did you want to move on to another topic?
No, you're fine. Any which way you want to go with this.
Okay. I guess going more into some biology, more into, let's see. I'm trying to wrap my head around this claim by SFT of, and maybe I'm just ignorant on the subject, but like this claim by SFT that common descent is like, I think we'd both agree that in order to do phylogenetics, you have to assume some kind of common descent, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, like I think maybe SFT can come in and in the chat and help me better understand this. But until he does, I feel like he's saying that common descent is not a valid assumption, right?
Yeah.
Or like it's not applicable in some way to all of life, which I think is bizarre because like we know that all life reproduces in certain ways. Where is there a better word for like I'm talking about like transmission genetics, basically.
Yeah.
Like from one generation to the next.
Right. So I think I'm going fuzzy. Let me shut my cam off. So he agrees that there were two cat kinds that jumped off the ark,
right?
And they turned into lions and tigers and cheetahs and things like that. So they had a common descent. So he believes in that, right?
Right.
So he just doesn't believe in moving the marker back beyond that, right?
Right.
And he says, oh no, that's common design before that. So it's common design, all of a sudden it's common descent. So I mean, and so for him, he's got his created heterozygosity, where he thinks that, okay, so 6,000 years ago, everything was created with all of this stacked up zygosity so that God could see into the future and know that so like what were there? There were all sorts of dinosaurs and all kinds of shit, before the flood. And a lot of that stuff went extinct except for two cat kinds. Right. Were there other cat kinds before that? Saber-toothed tigers. Okay. They might have been before the flood. So then these two cat kinds still have enough of that created heterozygosity left over to create lions and tigers and leopards and cheetahs. And it just seems to me like he's pretty much making up a story.
Right.
I mean, really.
Well, like he often, you mentioned common design. Well, like he says, well, of course we'd expect different kinds to be similar in certain ways. Well, like why though? Like,
yeah.
Do you understand what he's saying there?
He's kind of saying, he goes back to his SUVs, and it's like, okay, all cars have tires, right? So God needed tires. So God had a tire pattern, and he put it on all the cars. And then God had a steering wheel pattern, and he put that in all the cars, except for motorcycles.
Right.
He's something else. And I don't know. I just... Like I say, somebody has to do a phylogeny of cars so that we can look at this and try to do a phylogeny of cars and see what happens. But I mean, okay, if we try to stretch his analogy, did all cars, like did Ford's Model T, was that front loaded with created heterozygosity? That would be interesting. And cars don't have baby cars. So, okay,
No.
we got that. And we know that the two cats produced all these different species, and they did it by having babies. Okay.
Right.
And
Oh,
copying.
that's just a misrepresentation of SFT's model.
Yeah,
No
yeah,
one
that's
like
what I'm
that.
worried about. I'm worried about that. It's just like that's why I wish he would stop over here, not on his crazy yak fucking crazy channel with all those chatters out there, but stop over here and have a rational discussion with us, like he did a while back about Neanderthals. Like, remember that was about 3 months back, and I would like him to explain the model. I also want him to explain that whole flood thing. I want to know more about the dynamics of the flood, because I want to know what they think, what they've worked out. That would be interesting. But on this this design thing, you know, for one thing, we know, like I think I looked it up once, and I haven't been able to find it again, but collies have really long noses, and some dogs have short noses, and I think they found a mutation that did that. So there's a difference in the genes. Now, he would say, oh no, it wasn't a mutation. Those genes were already front loaded into the canine type that jumped off the ark. Well, if it turns out to be that there's more than 2 of them or 4 of them, then you would have a problem. You know, and not everything is like that. Sometimes you just have one allele that is long nose or short nose or whatever. But I think his whole thing falls apart on real detailed analysis. I don't think there's any way to front load all those mutations into 2 different animals, right? A male and a female. Supposedly they have all the heterozygosity they need to produce all of the changes in between cats and lions and whatever. And so if you look at the difference between a lion and a cat, and if you find mutations between them, and then you look at the difference between a cat and a cheetah, and you find different mutations, and then another one and another one, well, we have too many alleles now to fit into one breeding pair, right?
Right. It almost seems like it would be like this weird chimera of traits, basically. Like I don't think that's quite how genetics works, SFT.
So I mean, his model is falsifiable based on that, his created heterozygosity. So if we found one instance, you know, within a kind that had more than 4 alleles, basically, that were affecting the phenotype to make that species, then we would prove his created heterozygosity model false, right?
I think so.
Yeah. So we ought to go looking for one of those. I'm sure there's hundreds of them out there that we can find.
Right.
Like, now that we're getting better, I mean, I wonder if we've got genomes for every cat kind.
Something tells me probably at least a bunch of them. We're getting better and better at sequencing genomes.
Yeah, we've got, what the hell was I looking at the other day? Was it Drosophila? It was one of them. We had like, God, it looked like we had about 1,000 genomes on this one particular kind, you know, of thing. And I can't remember what it was exactly, but I don't know. I think the answer is there, and they're not going to look for it. They're not going to try to falsify their own. That's what they should be doing, right?
Yeah. Yes.
The Bible was a human phenomena. Yeah, it was a human phenomena.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Demeter's here.
Yep, Demeter's here. And Detzel.
Well, like, speaking of Drosophila, I was also looking back at what you remember our short chat on hopeful monsters, basically?
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, I think I feel like I figured out the problem in my thinking, basically. So after doing some research into it, I feel like I was not taking into account that the genes for morphology, more evolution of morphology, at least the genes being kind of tinkered with are the ones that control development, basically.
Yeah. So we were talking about whether it was regulatory genes or regulatory regions or the genes themselves. So what did you figure out?
So I guess, well, like I feel like, is there any real distinction between genes that code for transcription factors or genes that like code for proteins that make up like bone or something like that? Is there any real difference there?
Well, genes that code for transcription factors are either RNAs or proteins.
Right.
So there would be a gene that codes for each of those. So no, they just be genes. But then there are mutations in the regulatory region before genes that are going to affect when the gene is expressed and how much it's expressed.
Right.
So just how often it is. So we have all those factors all coming together to create the phenotype. Whatever.
Right. Because I feel like it would be kind of, I think maybe this was my issue. Oh, I'm lagging it. I don't know. Why does it do that when everyone else turns their mic off?
Oh, yeah. Try it again.
Hello.
Holy shit. Yeah, StreamYard is messed up. Yeah. My video has also been freezing. They got issues.
Huh.
And
yeah.
I gotta go to I have to go to OBS. It's just that I'm afraid. But I have to. And then I can bring you guys in on Zoom, and I don't think we'll have any of these issues at all.
Yeah.
And I'll be $30 a month richer.
So, let's see. Who do we have in the chat so far?
We got 11th Dimension. We got Dessel Drace. We got that's it, I think. Ian's in. Or no, wait a minute. I'm looking at the wrong thing. In a reality check. I forgot to save the chat. We got 11th and Dessel. You want to bring them in?
Sure, I guess. Let's bring in a guest.
Oh, we got Red Fang.
Red Fang. Well, yeah. I haven't met Red Fang. Who's he?
I don't know how to explain that. He'd have to explain that to you. He's a good character. So
yeah, we will let in a few people, but let's not turn this into a dumpster fire.
Right. Nephilim last night was really, really kind of screwed up on his stream. He took his stream down. I'm a little worried about him.
Oh, yeah, poor Nep.
He didn't sound good. And I think it's been a year since his wife passed away. So,
so
it's an anniversary, which is always really tough on people that lose somebody they love. And he didn't sound good, and he took the stream down, but he passed out and let it go for like 10 hours or something like that.
Ooh.
There are other interesting things happening. We have no takers. Not even Immutable Destiny has the balls to come in here. Immutable, are you still at the mall? Oh, wait a minute. I'm not supposed to say that. I'm not supposed to tell the public that Immutable's at the mall. He just yelled at me before we got online about it. But I don't know. I think it takes a tremendous amount of work to do that kind of detailed stuff, but I kind of like to do it. Like with broccoli and cabbage, somebody, and I lost the links for Christ's sake, but somebody linked me to Brassica. We have all kinds of genomes for all those different varieties.
Right.
Now, yeah, the difference between broccoli and cabbage. Now, if that's down to mutation, because there's about about 10 or 15 different vegetables that are derived from Brassica?
I think so.
Like that. Oh, we're getting a bunch of people. No, I'm not going to stay on here too long, guys, because we're supposed to do Santa tonight at 9. So,
yeah.
But I never get a word in edgewise if we get certain people on there.
You're too quiet.
Yeah, but then I'd be screaming and hollering and going, stop.
Okay, do that again.
Stop. Do I have to do it that way? Is
Yeah,
that the kind of person I have to become?
I think so.
No,
Damn.
Yeah, we don't need
go
any
to the
more.
dark side.
Yeah, don't go to the dark side.
Did you see that book I asked you about in chat?
I have not heard of that book. I didn't know that she
Yeah.
was.
Basically, I'm pulling out different quotes and stuff that in that Sal show, that Sal video. And I can't really find her quote. So,
Oh, you
but
tried.
anyway, Margulis.
Yeah, was it in that book?
It was in that book, but it was quoted in another book, and then the author of the paper, Welch, pulled it from that book that was quoting it. So
Okay.
I was just trying to get to the original source, but it's an
Yeah.
old book, and you can get it like hardcover for $919.
What?
Yeah, it's out of print.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh no.
But basically, I've got multiple attestations that she believes in evolution. She just was following a different model than the
Right.
neo-Darwinian synthesis.
Oh, you can get a paperback.
Yeah,
for 83.
She's got this thing going on where she doesn't like this is I'm getting this from secondary sources. I only have one book by Lynn Margulis. It's called Dazzle Gradually, where she talks about the basically the nature of nature, how it like slowly builds up like incredibly complex things. That's the point of this book. But in that book and others, and I'm getting this from secondary sources, I haven't read this material from Margulis herself, but her interest is that she doesn't like the whole Darwinian nature red and tooth and claw kind of thing. She wants to stress the possibility of like harmony and cooperation and
Right.
everybody getting together and singing Kumbaya. And so she wants to really focus on this idea of symbiosis. And so, I in the last stream you guys had, we were talking about Nick Lane, and he had some critical remarks about this. That it definitely her idea of symbiosis has its place, and we've even empirically like verified that this happens at this point. But at the same time, it seems that she's pushing this as almost an alternative sometimes to the Darwinian view of things. And he thinks it's kind of been exaggerated and kind of over pushed. So,
Right.
I want to point this. I have been threatened. Anyway, Immutable, you're too late. I'm already neutered. Had myself neutered.
Immutable's been threatening you?
He's I was doxing his location as being at the mall.
Oh.
Complaining. And he said he will castrate me, but I've already neutered myself. I had the vet do it at 60. When I turned 60, I decided to be neutered. And since then, I've been thinking a lot more clearly.
Yeah.
I recommend it. I strongly recommend, especially for you young guys, Andrew.
What?
Wait,
what?
What?
I don't know. I can sympathize. I can imagine you are thinking a lot more clearly, but at the same time, I kind of like to keep my junk.
I don't know what for. It's just I haven't found a use for them. I'm not missing anything, so I don't know.
What paper is Immutable asking about?
You're paying attention now, aren't you, Andrew?
Yes.
I don't know. Let's see.
What were you saying, Scott?
Oh, well, Immutable asked, when was the paper published?
Oh.
So I was just trying to follow up.
Oh, the one that 11th Dimension linked a paper called From Ancestral Peptides to Designed Proteins.
Ooh.
That one looks neat. I will share that. I guess I am a little tired today.
Well, you've been kind of going at it.
Yeah.
Yep. I haven't helped.
I
So,
guess it's a Chrome tag. There it is. That's the one that 11th. So this is by Alba and Lupus. Diversity of modern proteins arose through combinatorial shuffling. See, cell, no common ancestor for proteins. Differentiation of a limited number of autonomously folded domain prototypes. Now that's the interesting thing. Those domains are like little building blocks, and they aren't that big. In recent years, the proposal that they originated by repetition, accretion, and recombination from an ancestral set of peptides, which evolved as cofactors of RNA-based replication. That's what Demeter's talking about.
Yeah.
In catalysis, has gained wide acceptance, supported by the systematic identification of such ancestral peptides and the experimental recapitulation of the mechanisms by which they could have yielded the first folded proteins. Inspired by this evolutionary process, protein engineers have seized on design for pre-optimized peptide components as a powerful approach to generating proteins with novel topology and functionality. They're looking to make medicine. And that's what I think is going to kick abiogenesis research in the ass, because they want these basically self-creating medicines. So basically domains like, okay, if you have like a magnesium ion and you have a folded protein and there happen to be, say, 4 to 6 amino acids that can corral that magnesium ion. That's a domain. And then if the rest of that fold fits against some other type of molecule, biomolecule, then that magnesium ion can go to work on catalyzing some reaction. And that's kind of what they're looking for. So they're looking at these mini domains that are catalytically active. And they're finding fossil evidence that these domains, like a domain that is in more than one protein, took with it some of the signature amino acids that aren't really totally functional, but they can tell that one thing was copied from another. So, and that's another big field of research in evolution, figuring out how that happened. And then, of course, the key is to learn how to evolve our own proteins, yes. Give them something to do and just come up, with all these this jumble of different combinations. And then suddenly one little batch starts to catalyze something. And then you isolate that and find out, okay, what do you got here? Now we have a new medicine. So that's why evolution is important to medicine, or just one of the reasons why it's important. The other one is knowing the source of some diseases, basically, whether they have remnants in fish, some mammalian disease where we have fossil remnants in fish bones. That's all very interesting stuff.
I had something I wanted to touch on when you guys were talking about nested hierarchies.
Ooh, yes, go ahead.
So the idea coming from Jeanson and Standing is that you have these nested hierarchies, and he goes to his analogy about amphibious vehicles and stuff like that. And so because that's a way that the creator could have done it, nested hierarchies are compatible with creation. And so the move that they do then, though, is that they say, well, look, we can have nested hierarchies, and evolution has nested hierarchies. So nested hierarchies really doesn't matter one way or the other. And I think that that's a terrible argument. And the reason why is because while it might be true that nested hierarchies is compatible with creation, evolution specifically predicts it. And so the question is, when you're talking right now, I'm studying confirmation theory because I'm off in the philosophy of science right now. I was thinking about doing a video response to Dapper Dino on falsificationism. And so I'm off in Bayesian world right now. And so one of the things you talk about when you're doing a Bayesian calculation is the probability of the evidence given the hypothesis. How likely would it be that you would see this evidence given that the hypothesis is true, and that's part of the calculation that you have to do. And the thing is that when they make this little slippery move here, they try to act as if the probability of E on H is equal between the two respective viewpoints, but they're not. Evolution requires that this be true, whereas it's just, possibly compatible with creation, but God could have done it in whatever way he wanted to. So it's not true that the probability of the evidence given the hypothesis is equal between the two, and therefore nested hierarchy still counts as better evidence for evolution than it does for creation.
Right.
Right. That's a good point, actually. I think that in order for something to like if we were to say that nested hierarchies, for instance, are evidence for a common designer, then we would have to specify before the fact what is expected of a common designer, which of course, by definition, almost nothing is expected of a common designer, because a supernatural creator can do anything.
Right.
So yeah, I'd agree there, Drace. That's a good point.
Yeah, you can make up anything you want, and any kind of just so story you want, and they kind of accuse us of doing that. And I know evolutionary psychology got a black eye for doing just that, for making up just so stories. You can make up anything you want.
Yeah, and I think evolutionary psychology kind of deserved that punch in the eye. I got into a big dispute, a big Twitter dumpster fire with Gad Syed, because he was talking with somebody who said that evolutionary psychology was pseudoscience, and apparently his whole career is based on arguing that it's not.
Right.
And I didn't know who he was at the time, so I just chipped in with my worthless 2 cents and said, well, in my personal opinion, it's it is partly pseudoscience in that they do engage in these kind of just so stories sometimes, and they kind of overemphasize evolution in terms of certain developments of things that might be cultural or might have other explanatory factors. And he was so pissed off at me. He really ran into me like I was some hardcore SJW for suggesting this. But there's one last thing that I wanted to point out, which is that I also think that there's a problem when we're talking about, and it's not strictly to do with nested hierarchies, but it's related, because when you see the progression of it through the fossil record, I don't think they'll talk about ecological zonation and stuff like that. But when you see the shift from one living population and then you have morphological change over to the next, the pattern that you see there is also something that is just completely inexplicable from a creationist point of view. So, I just think that insofar as they're trying to deal with nested hierarchies, they have that evidential problem in terms of the fact that evolution predicts this more so than they do, but also they have a problem in terms of the placement, the placement that we see of the emergence of these features in the fossil record. And the last thing I'm going to say is that this point about how the creator can do whatever the hell he wants, and so it's really it's a matter of nested hierarchies being harmonious rather than specifically predicted. This point really gets hammered home most by Call Me Emo. This is something that he's constantly talking about all the time. So I just want to give him proper credit for being the guy that most frequently brings this up.
Right. Yeah, I think I don't think SFT likes the progression of traits in the fossil record very much.
Well, he tries to just downplay it. For example, in his debate with Stefan Frello, Frello brought up the transition to modern whales. So he brings up Ambulocetus natans, and Standing responded back. He's like, "Oh, well, it's just an alligator." And yeah, he said it's just an alligator. Now the thing is that it's true that Ambulocetus natans shared a very similar ecological niche in terms of what alligators do, but there's the thing has hooves at the end of its feet, So, I mean, it's really difficult to try to say that this is just like a modern alligator. There's no way in hell. But at the same time, if you go through the fossil record and you go way back in the alligator's lineage, there are hooved crocodiles. It's just you have to go way the hell back, in time to find them. But even so, I mean, like when you see all of this, all of these different features like this, it becomes really hard to make sense of it, other than major transitions being taking place in these lineages over time.
Yeah, that's another good point. So Drace, if I may ask you a question, what do you think about certain creationists like SFT and Jensen, kind of like you talked about the amphibious vehicles, for instance, but like what do you think about that as their kind of excuse, I guess, as to why we would expect, quote unquote, transitional forms in the fossil record?
I don't have a problem with their, basic idea that, given that God would create all these different beings, as suitable to their environments, that we would expect all of these different features to arise. I don't have a problem with that. Again, my take on that would be that it's compatible. It's just not really predicted. So I don't have a problem with them going that way if they want to harmonize it. The way that he's been selling it, though, because at first he was trying to sell it as a prediction until his debate with Gutsick Gibbon, and then after that he started to sell it as a retrodiction because she was constantly harping on the fact that nested hierarchies was something that young Earth creationists, like, basically they had to be dragged kicking and screaming over to nested hierarchies over the course of the last century. So to turn around now, 100, 150 years later, and say, oh, well, we predicted this the whole time. No, but you didn't. Not at all. So, yeah, I mean, that's basically how I feel about it.
Yeah.
Sorry, the last thing, I see Leo Filius is asking, what's Drace's Twitter handle? This is going way back, Leo. I don't use Twitter anymore at all, and I barely even use Facebook at all anymore either. I'm barely on social media. I will hop on Facebook once in a blue moon because the pages that I'm subscribed to have news articles, and I trust those sources a little bit more than I do any of the mainstream media sources. So every once in a while, I'll jump on there for some news, but besides that, I don't use social media anymore.
Right. So I guess. Oh. Uh-oh.
I'm sorry. If I mute, you guys start breaking up. Shit. We got one of those again. So I'll have Stan muted.
Okay. Well, so a question I want to pose to you guys would be, so I think in a broad sense, nested hierarchies can be made to fit with designed objects, for instance, or I guess actually the reverse. But I don't think it's quite the same as in phylogenetics. Like cars, for instance, don't show synapomorphies after you do the analysis.
Yeah. We need to get a bunch of cars, and we need to do a tree and try to do some of that stuff and show how different it is for basically vehicle design than what we're finding in evolution. And the other thing is cars don't have, well, it would be like, okay, there are some things in cars. How the hell would we do that? I'm trying to think of non-conserved regions of genes, like introns, the non-conserved parts. We can see hierarchies with those. We can see phylogenies in the non-conserved parts.
Wait.
Wait.
So you're saying LPP is wrong when he says that only only coding regions are used in nested hierarchies?
Yeah, he's definitely wrong. We use non-coding regions all the time.
Uh-oh. LPP is wrong. My whole worldview was disintegrated.
Because the non-conserved regions are where you're going to see the most changes, basically.
Right.
And you're also going to verify patterns, and there is no reason for those non-coding where the sequence doesn't matter, non-conserved regions, those things have a lot higher mutation rates, right?
Right.
And you're going to be able to see finer changes, and you can see hierarchies and phylogenies in those regions, and that's where a lot of work needs to be done. And then you compare your phylogenies, and lo and behold, sometimes they work, and sometimes there are problems. There are slight differences, and then you have to go work it out. Well, are we looking at linkage disequilibrium, gene conversion? Are we looking at incomplete lineage sorting or whatever? But you can always find an answer for it. And the thing is that if God just had to write, if he had to doodle something that really didn't matter what he doodled, just to fill in a space, why did God doodle it just a little bit different every time so that it matched this hierarchy? Right. That's a good question. Why would God make mutational mistakes in his doodles that match evolution rather than just use the same doodle all the time?
Right, like nested hierarchies are apparent in things not related to function, for instance.
Right. Yeah, or why didn't he just doodle something different for every single intron between two different species? Between the bear kind and the cat kind, right? Why should there be non-conserved regions that have exactly the same errors, and then you go back another step, or go to some other extant species that's an outlier or in an outgroup? It's even more mutant. Why did he make mistakes that looked exactly like evolution? It doesn't make any sense. And that's a thing that they never want to talk about. But we have to find that evidence. So we actually have to find phylogenetic studies on non-conserved regions. Well, I think if I'm not mistaken, the D loop and mitochondria is one of those. But mitochondria is not a really good place to look for phylogenies that are ancient, okay, or that go way out there. So we have to find some genome regions, basically, that are non-conserved and figure it out.
Hey, Speed, do you think we could potentially let Gutsa Gibbon in here if she wants to give her thoughts on this?
Oh, she's here.
Yep.
I didn't see her. We'll let the Gibbon in. I am really tired, guys, so I may not be making any sense at all.
You're doing fine. Are you still doing Snatter tonight?
Yeah, I gotta get some rest. That's why I'm hoping Immutable will come in and sub, or I can just let you guys run, or we can wrap it up. We'll see if Gutsec wants to come in.
Yeah, I guess I'll determine.
Yep.
I hope. I would. It would be a pleasure of mine if she can come in, because I always like to have chats with her and ask her questions, because she's a very kind primate.
And when she comes in, she always comes in at a time when we have a lot of talky people, and she ends up being too quiet. So now would be a really good time to come in, Erica, if you want to stop in.
Yeah.
We'd have a quieter talk where people are respecting each other for a change.
Yeah.
You know who you are. Yeah, you offenders, you know who you are.
The offenders.
The offenders. It's getting a little hard to manage.
Yeah, if you're going to do that tonight, Speed, definitely take yourself a nap, grab some coffee, sniff some blow, something.
Yeah, should I sniff glue?
Something. But yeah, I mean, like, you're making total sense. It's just that just like last time when I went 2 days without sleep, and I was just kind of like, all sorts of messed up when I was in chat, and you said, to go get some sleep. I'm kind of feeling the same way right now, that it's like, oh, I feel your pain, because I know how it is when you're tired.
Yeah, we could probably go ahead, Andrew.
I just want to say I stand corrected. She's a gentle and modern primate, so I apologize, Erica.
I thought she was an ancient primate. No, she's kind of a newbie. So I don't know. We could end this and reconvene at 9:00. Oh no, Erica's here, so you guys can go ahead and talk. I'm gonna step back and let you guys talk. Okay.
Okay.
Yo,
How are you
what's going on?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm just sitting here. I'm trying to edit a video that I'm trying to get out by Tuesday on plankton. So it's going to be fun.
Well, I hope we didn't pressure you to come in here. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to I guess hear your thoughts on the topic of nested hierarchies again, because it is a favorite of mine.
Yeah, I mean, I can always dip in and give my thoughts for sure. I mean, I tend to always put them into the scope of monkeys, but
Right. So I guess well, like we've chatted before about whether or not common descent, and I think we agreed that common descent is assumed in phylogenetics, right?
I think where we last left off, my major contention with the use of assumed is that it's only assumed in the idea that we accept the nature of heredity.
Right.
So was there a point in time where some scientist said, my theory is that there's common descent, and therefore I predict this, and then they followed up on it, and it became so well accepted, it's now assumed as kind of like the starting point. Is that how it happened, or?
I mean, I think that's a fair way of putting it. I mean, since Mendelian genetics and general, like the idea of heredity, right? So that the idea that holds and that we can't show that there's any gaps where it wouldn't, all the way up through the eukaryotes, at least. In my opinion, and from what I've seen, it's not really that it's assumed, it's that it's accepted as a fact of the reality we live in, I think is a better way of putting it.
So it's not the nefarious, evil kind of assumption that evolutionists are always accused of making. You assume evolution, and that's why you won't accept this explanation from fairies and deities.
Yeah, right. I think you could push back if if you were talking to like SFT or something like that, and he was like, well, phylogenetics assumes common ancestry, right? I mean, you could argue that phylogenetics, in the sense that we run ancestry tests within humans, assumes common ancestry. That's what's shown to be the case because of how heredity works.
Yeah,
right. I think you'd agree, Erica, that like, for instance, the theory of I'm trying to think how to put this, but like the theory of common descent of all life basically is somewhat separate from the idea of just natural selection or genetic drift or all these other mechanisms. Like it's you can test common descent without having to test natural selection, for instance, right?
Yeah, I mean, common descent is just looking at relationships of organisms in their genomes, or if you're examining like specific genes or ERVs or whatever, it's a similarities game. Natural selection and mutation is more of a mechanism. It's more elastic, if that makes sense.
Right. So I guess, for instance, common descent is based on I believe called transmission genetics, something along those lines.
I don't know. I mean, that sounds right. Transmission genetics. I mean, is that just in reference to the idea that genes are passed down?
Yeah, I think so. I looked it up, and like for instance, a professor I talked to mentioned transmission genetics and population genetics, for instance, as ways of creating nested hierarchies, of generating that kind of pattern. And I guess I was kind of wondering, was that kind of knowledge of how genes are not genes necessarily, because I know genes weren't known back in Darwin's time, but like this idea of transmission of hereditary something, what was it kind of, for the most part, figured out around the time of Darwin and Mendel?
So Darwin didn't really know about genetics. That's partially what's so cool about what he did. He saw this relationship reflected in the morphology of organisms. And by and large, a common claim that I have heard from the usual suspects, in this case, Ramat, is that, you know, genetics undermined the phylogenetics, or rather the taxonomic trees that we saw prior to its implementation, right, into sussing these things out. That's simply not the case. It certainly refined things, and it changed a lot of the terminal branches of these trees. But as far as, like, I would even go so far as to say, like, at the family level, things just didn't shift around very much with the advent of genetics, because phenotype is inherently a reflection of genotype, at least of expressed genotype, right? Or expressed areas of the genotype. So, you know, Darwin, I mean, Darwin was just like, I almost, as an individual, am surprised that no one figured it out before him. But then I put myself into that mindset, and I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have figured it out. You know, most people just didn't travel enough to notice the relationship between living organisms. But you know, he was a kind of an oddball. He did a lot of like breeding animals too, like pigeons and stuff like that. He spent a lot of time with barnacles and plants and orchids, things like that.
You know the reason why he hadn't figured out genetics?
Do I know the reason? Oh,
the reason he hadn't figured out genetics basically I'm guessing because the Gibbons hadn't created their empire yet.
Yeah. Well, I think
if you were around, you could have fought him.
I think really and truly he you know, people had an inkling that reproduction involved passing down traits. You know, it's not that, it's more he didn't know of genetics in the sense that we know of it, right? Like he kind of saw the results of it reflected in breeding animals. I mean, if you want to go so far as to say selective breeding, artificial selection is like a very brute understanding of what genetics is and how it behaves, then we've understood genetics since like 150,000 years ago, when we first started encountering wolves and stuff. Maybe more like 50,000 years ago.
You can you can just real quick that you can see like really old references to that kind of understanding. They usually bring it up in certain introductory to genetics courses, where you can find references to an understanding of genetics even in the Talmud.
There you go. Yeah, like this idea, and it would be like this idea, Drace, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be this idea that reproduction involves passing down certain traits, and if you want those traits to proliferate, then you're going to want to, you know, selectively encourage the breeding of organisms that have it.
Yeah, the example that the Talmud gives, if I remember correctly, is on hemophilia. So they recognize that, you know, if you had certain family members where this was a trait, they strongly encouraged you not to get circumcised, you know, in that scenario, because they knew that you would bleed to death.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So you know, you can kind of understand. Darwin didn't understand genetics in the sense that Mendel kind of started getting into it with specific notice taken to kind of the minutia of the early basic stuff, right? And part of that too is just because the tech wasn't there. You know, I mean, it's actually insane, you know, that we managed to get some of the ideas that we've gotten without the technology that would kind of come later and make everyone's lives a lot easier. With regard to observing it and supporting it. But yeah, I mean... oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, or I was just going to say, so basically you're saying you don't really even need the genetics. Well, I guess technically you do need it nowadays, but like at the basic level, you don't really need the genetics component as a basis of common descent. Really, you just need some way of transmitting traits from one generation to the next, basically the transmission component.
It provides enormous support. Genetics does, with phylogenetics, really. As far as supporting the, you know, and I use this word a lot, but like the minutia of it, right? This allows us to link terminal ends of branches, species and subspecies, you know, and come up with relationships between animals that are so closely related we wouldn't have been able to do it with just morphology. Or like paleogeography. because animals are weird and they raft around and do things that make biogeography a really good method, but not a flawless one. I mean, that's this Platyrrhine and Catarrhine split in primates back in the at the Eocene-Oligocene boundary was one of the kind of difficulties faced by creating a phylogenetic tree just with morphology, right? Because, or rather, sorry, not morphology, biogeography. You're using support from biogeography. Because we've got these proteopithecids basically rafting over to accidentally over to South America, and people didn't really know that was something that was doable, right? So in the eyes of everyone else, it's like, okay, well, we've got all these monkeys here and we've got all these monkeys here, and they're very, very different. And so you would almost end up with a much earlier divergence than you would actually get looking at the molecular genetics. So I would argue that you can create a very basic phylogenetic tree, probably at the family or order level with morphology in eukaryotes. And it's gonna be pretty accurate, like when you actually run tests with genetics. But to really get into the details of common descent and start supporting it on a level that is, for lack of a better term, kind of like ubiquitous across genes that you can test, right? And just creating this massive bolster. That's going to be the genetics positives, right? Like that's why it was implemented. That's why it's used. So that the short answer to your question is you can do nested hierarchies with morphology. It's better with genetics.
Right.
I've got an irrelevant question. How did your talk yesterday go for Darwin Day? You, Dapper, and Jackson, and did Dapper record it like he said he was gonna?
Yeah, I think he has it recorded. You can find it. It's on YouTube. Sorry, I've got to hold on just a sec. Hey, quit it! No. Sorry, someone's car alarm went off outside. My dogs are going.
I feel your pain, Erica.
They're bad, and it's cold here, so they've got cabin fever. Yeah, so yeah, it was a good talk. It went really well. It was at the Secular Society of MIT. It's on their YouTube channel, so you can find it there. And generally, it was just we gave our presentations. Dapper covered the more recent history of like creationist quote unquote work in dinosaurs, what they've been saying, what they've been, how they've been coping with the great feather conundrum and things like that. My end was obvious on primates. That's kind of what I focused on. And then Jackson went pretty broad with his and covered, general, I don't know, it's like bunglings by the YECs on a mainstream level, I guess. I don't know. It was good though. We had an after show kind of where people asked questions from the audience, and it was interesting. There was a lot of stuff that it went in a direction that I wasn't really expecting. There were a lot of they were talking about, which this wasn't surprising, but it was still interesting to hear. They were talking about how they get a lot of apologists there at MIT coming around, and they're not arguing anymore against evolution. It's all origins or bust. These guys come and as a result, a lot of the questions in the after show were like about chirality, or wet dry cycling. How far can that get you? And things like that. And I was kind of sitting there like, well, I don't really do origins of life research. Like, I don't really. It's cool. It interests me, but about at the same level, but like maybe even a little less than like geology does. Like I like big animals that are once you get Precambrian and onward.
So whose YouTube channel did you say it was?
It's on the Secular Society of MIT's YouTube page.
Yeah, I have. I'm a little different because I do end up with a big interest in abiogenesis, but that's just because I'm kind of like, I hate to say this, but kind of like Danny in a sense, because I have my main interest is philosophy stuff, and so my main guy, the the guy that I follow most, who I like most in philosophy, is Friedrich Nietzsche, and his whole thing is he has this idea of life being fundamentally the will to power, and he understands this in a biological sense, which I would argue makes him the original metabolism firster.
Yes.
So like, since he has that understanding of life, and since I think it's actually really important in terms of how we understand our nature as living organisms, that's why I was so drawn to abiogenesis and to the metabolism first view, and so that's why I've taken such an interest in it. But I am too still learning. I've read a bunch of books on abiogenesis, but there's still a bunch of stuff that I have to look at. So I'm still working on it, but still I think that I'm personally more of a metabolism first guy, and I find it really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, and I think weirdly enough, what I find most interesting about abiogenesis is the prebiotic conditions of the planet. Like, I don't know, like I don't think there's a word. There's probably some like German word for it, but I find like a deep, like it's analogous to nostalgia, like exploring the idea of what these ancient environments must have been like. Like, what would it have been like to stand, on the shores during the Devonian? What would you have seen? So like imagining these warm little, potentially, depending on what you subscribe to, either like warm little pools on this prebiotic earth that's mostly
Bring an oxygen tank.
I don't know, it's romantic. It's cool.
I wanted to comment on that origins or bust thing. There seems to be a shift in the community, creationists, to abiogenesis in the last 4 or 5 months, where that's all they want to talk about now. What do you think?
I think so. And this is my personal experience. The interesting thing is like, because I used to be a theistic evolutionist, and when I first got into all this stuff, this whole conversation, I did so because I had a young Earth creationist coworker who I would get coffee with, because, I studied anthropology. I mean, I've always been interested in evolution, and specifically human evolution and primates, outside of the whole creation evolution chat. But I started looking into it when I started getting coffee with this guy, because he drove me freaking crazy at work with, like, he was like prolecitizing the creationist worldview in a way that I'd never really encountered. I was like, who cares? You know what? But then I got into it and I found out that it was actually really fun to talk about. But yeah, it went very much the same way. Like, he and I were on the same page as far as like there being a god at the time, so we didn't touch on much of the abio stuff. And instead, the funny thing is that if you're in agreement on abiogenesis, like if you're like Sagart or something like that, like it'll instantly go not to evolution, but to scripture. So like, you see what happens when someone like Sagart talks to somebody who's maybe like a young earther, right? They don't talk about evolution. They talk about scripture, because these guys will do anything they can to not talk about the actual crux of it, which is in macroevolution with organisms that we see today. Like, once you get to the Cambrian and onward, like they don't want to talk about it. Anything but that. So I don't know. It's interesting.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Hey.
Just dropping in.
Well, that's great. Good to see you. I've been wondering where you've been.
So, hey, Erica. So we also talked about developmental genes, I think, which I know isn't your particular area of expertise, but I want to ask, basically, do you think, like me and Speed, for instance, were having this discussion the other day, but like what do you think is the significance of developmental genes in the evolution of morphology over time?
I mean, golly, developmental genes are enormously important. That interestingly enough, those developmental genes to gross morphology are what's going to change first, right? Like, you got to develop it in vitro, so to speak, before you can ever see it come to fruition in a fitness benefit sense in an adult organism, right? I mean, I'm thinking like multicellular terrestrial life in this sense, right? But
No.
I mean, I'm trying to think of a good example. So like a prehensile tail in New World monkeys and platyrrhines. We see prehensile tails in only a handful of these guys. You know, when people draw cartoon monkeys, they always get that cool prehensile tail, but very few monkeys actually have them. And it's this really cool. It essentially acts like a fifth limb for these guys as they're scrambling through the trees. And it's a very clear adaptation to the habitat that these guys live in, which is a flooded forest. It's a forest that is flooded for most of the year. So they have to be able to amble through the trees pretty quickly. And also there's, jaguars there that are pretty efficient arboreal predators when they need to be. So this idea would be that since these guys came from likely proteopithecids, which abjectly did not have prehensile tails, how do you get the selection for that? How do you end up with monkeys with prehensile tails? Well, you have to have a change in utero, right, for the development of the first and foremost the muscle structure that's around these things. You need something that is capable of having grip on the underside of the tail. They tend to have like these rough patches of skin so that they can kind of, because they don't just wrap that tail around willy-nilly. It's along the bottom, and they utilize it in that way. But you have to have a whole host of morphologic change that would necessarily have to happen when this organism is in the womb. So these developmental changes they have to happen at that level. I'm reminded of Neil Shubin's work, or rather the work that he covers in Your Inner Fish when he talks about digits. How do you get digits, right? Well, it's a difference in expression. It's prolonged expression in an area that normally expression would stop, right?
Right.
And that's how most of these structures come about. You get a structure that is typical, a precursor structure that is typical, and then something about its expression is changed to be atypical. And obviously there's a huge chance that it's going to be neutral impact, where you get weird little advents on the organism that don't really do anything, or you can get something that's lethal. You end up with a monkey with no tail, and that's no good, or a dwarfed tail, that's no good. But every so often you end up with something extraordinary that helps the organism. And because we're dealing with macroscopic life here, fitness, especially in social animals, is going to be something that is impacted pretty quickly and will proliferate also pretty quickly if it's going to offer some kind of gross fitness benefit, if that makes sense.
Right.
Sorry, I'm not. Developmental stuff isn't really my thing, but I hope that was at least a little informative.
Rational. Have you read Sean B. Carroll at all?
I've listened to some of his videos online, but no, I haven't read any of his books, sadly.
Okay, so he's all about Evo Devo. So he's got Endless Forms Most Beautiful, which you'll see referenced all over the place, and then he's got The Making of the Fittest, From DNA to Diversity. And so like in there you'll find all sorts of stuff about like Hox genes' influence on the body plan, and the work that was done on embryology, and the work that was done in terms of like understanding mutations with respect to the hopeful monsters and everything like that they experimented with in the early 20th century. And he's a great writer. So if you're interested in developmental genes, that's a place where that author Sean Carroll is where I found a bunch of really interesting information. There's also How the Snake Lost Its Legs and other tales from Evo Devo, which I have, but I haven't read yet.
Isn't he a physicist?
There's Sean B. Carroll, and another Sean Carroll that is in physics.
Yeah, two different guys. Sean Carroll, physicist, and then Sean B. Carroll, who's a biologist.
Oh, okay.
Well, in the case of like, a lot of that stuff with Hox genes and body plans, it's really funny because a lot of creationists, once you get into conversations about how a body plan changes, how do you get a fin to turn into a hand, or how do you get a wing, all these kinds of arguments. And the answer is always, well, from the stance of, what's the use in half a wing, what's the use in half of one of these structures? Well, now obviously it was never predicted, or rather it was predicted, that every single intermediate stage from essentially one structure to the next, or an advent of that structure, it has to be useful in and of itself. It has to be useful in its own right as in conferring a fitness benefit to the organism. But what Drace was talking about with these body plan changes, there's just some really interesting stuff out there, where the development of hands or like digits, like I was talking about earlier, it's controlled by like 2 patches of tissue. And if you get a duplication event right at the distal end of one of these patches of tissue, or rather like limb buds, well, then you're going to start getting another little limb bud at the end of that one, and you're looking at the beginnings of something with digits. And this is reflected in the fossil record, where once we start getting terrestrial life with digits instead of rays, we see animals, tetrapods, with all different kinds of numbers of digits, from 4 to 8 to 9.
Right, yeah. I guess what I was trying to I guess clarify on was, do these kind of developmental body plan genes, do they show the same kind of incremental variation as in the genes you typically hear of, like blood genes or bone genes, for instance?
Like, can you do a phylogenetic tree from body plan genes?
Well, I guess, well, Drace mentioned hopeful monsters, for instance, and how you can get flies, for instance, with legs sticking out of their heads, and obviously that's not the kind of changes that we're talking about here, right? We're talking about more incremental variations, basically. And so I was asking, can those kinds of variations be present in more regulatory genes as well?
I would imagine so. I mean, I would imagine you get both. It entirely depends on the structure in question, or the change in question. I mean, you can get real drastic things like a single mutation that results in the emergence of a novel protein, or you can get something very, very slight that results in an organism, being born with two digits fused together. And that organism with the 2 digits fused together, as well as the one with the novel protein, regardless of whether those 2 mutations or changes provide a fitness benefit or not, by and large, as long as those things aren't lethal, with the protein, I'm referring to the ice fish, the antifreeze protein, right? Right. That would be something that would be really helpful and may allow the organism to expand its range and reproduce with more other fish, and then that's great, and it's going to be passed on a lot. And then fused digits, that may harm the fitness of the animal, but probably not so much so that it's not going to be able to reproduce. Now, if it got bad enough, maybe, you might have offspring that's fused even more, and then eventually you've got something with some digit that's kind of a hindrance to this amalgamation of 2 other ones. But the point, the overall, I get rambly, but the point that I'm trying to make is just that it depends. Yes, but it depends is the answer to the question.
With the idea that the situation has to be where the morphology with respect to the environment, we're talking beneficial features all the way through. We were talking about that with Argatha, and I gave like an alternative scenario that I just want to bring up and get your thoughts on, which is that, suppose you have a situation where a certain portion of the population is not the fittest. They don't have the fittest features at that particular point in time, so their portion of the population starts to dwindle. But it's not so, the genetics that they have, it's not so deleterious that they're automatically wiped out. It's just like a slow, gradual decline. But then with a corresponding environmental shift later, suppose that declining population now has the fit features, and you would see a corresponding explosion of their part of the population then. Do you think that is an alternative scenario that could also be a viable way of development besides seeing it being beneficial all the way through?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I would argue that can be the case, that is not really an alternative. It's just a different way of expressing the original situation.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but I would totally agree. Yeah, because that happens all the time. But in history, right? Like in the history of life on this planet. The way I thought you were going with that is also something that's really common, which is that, you might have a supremely objectively fitter population of two different organisms. And this organism, for whatever reason, while it's thriving, its numbers are booming, it happens to live a touch closer to a local volcanic range. And when this range goes off, this population is wiped out, it's suffocated by, anoxic conditions or whatever. And the more distant population, while less fit, by pure chance, is the only one remaining.
Yeah, that's Dan. Dan has pointed that out a few times when he's stressing the importance of neutral theory, where basically what happens has absolutely nothing to do with fitness. And I'm totally cool with that. At the same time, I'm coming across some research now. I'm particularly relying on two population geneticists, Matthew Hahn and Andrew Kern. And these guys are on the attack against neutral theory these days. And I'm really starting to buy into what they have to say. So I think at some point, me and Dan are going to start getting into it on the status of the extended synthesis. But we'll see what happens.
Oh, that'll be interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's. I tend to my thoughts on a lot of this stuff, on a lot of the theory coming out from evolutionary biology, is that if my very small so far experience in research has told me anything, it's that there's hardly ever one all-encompassing answer. So it could be that it's a little of column A, a little of column B. I find it kind of humorous almost when I encounter someone who's in the literature, and this happens all the time, just because this is how literature gets published. You have to be bombastic in your discoveries. But someone will be like, this is the ultimate pressure for, I don't know, the exploitation of this particular resource. And it's like, I don't think that you can ever say that. There's always something else at play when you're dealing with biology, because it's organisms that are ultimately at the, ironically enough, ultimately at the mercy of their environment. And that includes things that we could never account for, different social factors and the individual nature of each organism itself. Sometimes organisms just do weird things. And tracking down that ultimate cause tends to be difficult. I don't know. There's a lot of in the primate community. There's a lot of discourse over the social brain hypothesis, which is this idea that it's like, okay, well, why do primates have big brains compared to their bodies when compared to other mammals? What's the ultimate reason? And you got a lot of different ideas on that. And I think that it's ridiculous that everyone is positing a single idea when it could just be some combination. And you hear this is it instead of this is the primary thing, but you don't hear that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Actually, you know what? I'm going to get in line. Whoever it is that was just starting to talk, go ahead and I'll go after you.
Oh, I was just going to say, I just have one thing to say. Alexa, what is the temperature?
Right now, it's -8 degrees Fahrenheit.
Gross.
Tonight, expect a low of -16 degrees.
Oof.
Thank you.
It sucks, Brenda. It sucks.
It's horrible. I'm in the South, and we're supposed to get like 8 inches of snow this week, which is unusual for the location.
Global warming isn't true.
Yeah.
It's refuted.
Yeah, my sister up north has 20-something below right now. So, Brenda, you and I are in the South as far as Minnesota's concerned. We live down in the South.
Well, yeah, there is a big tongue of cold air coming down from the Arctic.
Yeah, my brother showed me his frozen tree in Austin, Texas. Their trees are budding, and the thing is covered in ice, and I guess they're getting 5 inches of snow. This
wow,
weekend.
What are they going to do? They don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, it's going to be 21 degrees, I guess.
Yeah, they don't know what
Erica,
to do in Tennessee either.
I have a question for Erica. Are you familiar with Massimo Pigliocci?
No, I'm not.
Okay, he's a philosopher that I like to follow, and he's written books on. He does most of his work on the demarcation problem, and
Okay, roger that.
so he has a book on evolution and stuff. And I was just curious if you had heard of it, knew of it, and had any kind of feedback on it.
Is it like some evolutionary psych stuff?
He's
But it's not. Give me a couple seconds, and I'll just go to my I'll go to my library, consult my librarian, and get it for you. Just a second.
Can you get us a link and a spelling?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Massimo, I used to work as a radio show producer like a decade ago, and I used to get Massimo on a couple of different radio shows all the time. He has since really branched out a lot more from biology into philosophy, and he's really started to stress the importance of Stoicism and arguing for Stoicism and stuff. But he has several books on biology, on the philosophy of science, and he has an analysis of the extended synthesis today. Now, I haven't read his book on the extended synthesis, but from what I saw in an article that he wrote, it looks like he is, and don't quote me on this because I would need to, read the book instead of taking my word on it because I could be wrong. But it looks like he's kind of doing what I was just talking about, which is kind of moving away from Gould's whole thing on, the spandrels paper and everything like that, kind of anticipating the rise again of a kind of neo-adaptationism. But again, don't quote me on that because I could be wrong. I haven't read the book yet. But yeah, Massimo's cool. I'm not all that much on Stoicism. My mentor growing up, I had this particular guy. I'm not going to name his name because me and him don't talk anymore. But he taught me philosophy and logic and a bunch of stuff as I was growing up. And he's a co-author with Massimo on a book that they wrote on Stoicism. So yeah, he's good. He's definitely worth looking into.
Oh, cool.
Okay, so I have the book here. It's called Making Sense of Evolution, The Conceptual Foundations of Evolutionary Biology by Massimo Pigliocci and Jonathan Kaplan.
Pigliocci. Him.
Pagliucci or Pigliucci, I don't know how to say it. It says Making Sense of Evolution. This is the inside thing. The blurb explores contemporary evolutionary biology, focusing on elements of its current theoretical structure, selection, adaptation, and species that are complex, open to multiple possible interpretations. Some are incompatible. Particular experimental methods, for example, one may demand one understanding of selection, while the application of the same concept to another area of evolutionary biology could necessitate a different definition. So I was just curious about that. Then the other book of his that I like is called Nonsense on Stilts, How to Tell Science from Bunk. That's another one of his. I haven't gotten to that one either. I was just curious. I agree that I don't have a strong attraction to Stoicism. That's what you mostly see him in popular media talking about Stoicism. That's his big thing. But his professional life is about the demarcation problem. What is the difference between science and pseudoscience?
Yep. Yeah, he's an Italian fella. He used to teach at Stony Brook. Yeah. Yep. And the name is pronounced Pigliucci. And the last thing I wanted to throw in really quick is if Dan or anybody who is interested in this discussion about neutral theory versus alternatives like adaptationism, the Matthew Hahn, Andrew Kern collaboration I was talking about before, they have a couple of books out, but at the same time, one of the main papers they wrote is called Neutral Theory in Light of Natural Selection. So anybody who's interested in this discussion.
I just posted a link to that paper in chat.
I'll pass it on to Dan because I imagine that's something that he would be all over having a fun chat about.
Oh, please talk to me about that because I'm pretty hot on that. And neutral theory, kind of like it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, classical Darwinism for the win.
Yeah.
Well, Massimo talked to Tom Jump about a month ago, maybe he'd be willing to talk to you guys. I mean, Erica's not a slouch, and neither are you guys. I mean, it would be an interesting conversation.
I don't know about not a slouch, but I think I could pull it together for a conversation.
You're informed in your area of study, and you're not and outside of your area of study, you have a good deal of experience discussing these issues with, well, crazy people, but whatever.
Yeah, less crazy would be good.
Yeah, that'd be a fun change of pace for sure.
That would be a good talk. Yeah. I think I have. Do I have one of his books? I've got a book called The Extended Synthesis. Who wrote that? Do you know, Dessel?
No, I don't.
Oh.
Nope.
No
Sorry, I was on mute. The Extended Synthesis. Yeah, actually, hold on 1 second. Let me pull that up because I'm pretty sure. I think I got that one, but give me a minute. Let me look into it.
Yeah.
After that,
Massimo's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say after that. I don't know if you want to wrap up soon, Speed, since I know you have Sonata tonight. So
I would love to get a nap before Sonata, if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, by all means.
Massimo has also given weighed in on the consciousness problem, and he says that there just isn't a hard problem of consciousness. He just
good. I like him already.
You can probably Google.
Yeah,
I mean, he's got statements that he's put out several times there. He just doesn't think it's a problem. I kind of tend to agree. I tend to be into that camp where consciousness just it just is.
Well, it's a hard
what we think it is.
It's a hard problem of intuition is what it is. I mean, it's hard for us ordinary citizens to get our minds around this consciousness thing, but it's not a hard problem for science or neuroscience.
Well, I mean, it's going to be a big problem because there's human brains. There's a lot of neurons, and we aren't close to modeling that kind of complexity with our little computers yet.
Gerd B. Muller and Pigliocci are the ones that wrote Extended Synthesis. So.
I was just about to say that when I pulled it up, that's Pigliocci's.
I've got that one.
So, but there are other ones though that I'm pretty sure that there are other books with the same. His is Evolution, the Extended Synthesis, but I was thinking of at least one other book as I'm like searching through books and stuff like that. That's called the Extended Synthesis. So there are others besides. And man, there was one last thing I wanted to say here, and it's slipping my mind. So I'm shouting out for a second.
Yeah, there was a paper that was recently published that I was taking a look at that had talked about researchers took memory. I'm going to sneeze here just a second. Excuse me. The researchers took memory cells from snails. They use snails because their neurons are very large, and they can train the snails to avoid electric shocks. And they took memory cells from one snail, and they dropped it onto another snail, and they also let some of it drop onto a culture of cells. And both the culture and the snail acquired the memories of this other snail that had been trained to avoid electric shocks, and they avoided electric shocks. This was a very recent study, and it's.
So, what kind of material was transferred? Was it just RNA?
I have to look. I'll have to. It'll take me a second. I can get you a link to it here.
If we're talking memory, then every single time somebody mentions memory, I'm automatically going to bring up Eric Kandel. I mean, he just has to be brought up. Yeah. If you check out, if you want a lay book on the topic, it's called In Search of Memory. And the whole point of it is his Nobel Prize winning work on the molecular basis of memory and understanding how it works in the brain.
Yeah, but at the level of these snails, there's a possibility of either RNA or some other biomolecules modifying something that ends up being a part of that learning system. And that would be the same as when we learn something or remember something, there is an underlying structure in our body and the world that is equally important with the neuroplasticity.
They extracted RNA.
Okay, so RNA is interesting.
So it's not just memory. The memory was encoded in the snail's RNA.
Yeah, so it produced a certain kind of RNA.
Yeah.
Probably small RNAs, and when you can transfer that from one to the other, but that's going to affect. But I wouldn't count on being able to remember your mom with RNA.
Well, no,
that would require neuroplasticity.
The other thing I was just going to mention quick in terms of the hard problem. I mean, there's a ton of literature and stuff on it, but there was this conference, I guess, with Dan Dennett and David Chalmers, and there was this one other contributor, and I think it's like as close to a debate as Daniel Dennett ever got with David Chalmers, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think they've ever directly engaged each other in public in any kind of formal debate. I could be wrong, but I've never found anything like that. But they both give consecutive talks, and I believe Chalmers starts, and then Dennett gets up afterward, and Dennett does a really good job in that particular lecture, I thought, of presenting his case pretty forcefully against the idea of the hard problem. And if anybody finds the video that I'm referencing on YouTube, I would just strongly recommend that once you get finished with both Chalmers and Dennett, to stop the video right there, because the third guy who gets up on stage, he just totally destroys the rest of the conference. He really dumbs down and he kind of ruins the whole thing. So yeah, those two are worth it, but the last guy wasn't. And anybody who's interested in it, check out that video.
Well, here's the thing about David Chalmers. He's a really intelligent man. He's smart enough to basically know that there really is no hard problem, but he's also smart enough to know that the hard problem made him famous. Those are the two things you need to know about Chalmers. He writes some good stuff, which argues against his own position. So
you'll love to see it.
Yeah. I found it and put the link here in the chat.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm gonna look at this snail paper later. This is interesting. I had not heard of this.
Oh, where'd you put the snail paper?
Both inside and outside chats.
Thank you,
Erica. You should just come to the light side and accept dualism.
You are such a good person.
Listen, Danny. We need to have a serious conversation about you not wanting to accept your identity as an ape at some point.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, really? That's so transphobic.
You don't accept that, Danny? You're an ape.
No, I'm saying in principle, I don't have to accept. I could see myself differently.
In principle.
Yeah, like if someone didn't see themselves as an ape, I don't see the problem.
Hey guys,
as long as they're consistent and also don't see themselves as a mammal.
So
I mean, look, they could see themselves as a reptile. I don't think there's a problem.
So Erica, Danny and I are going to talk about natural selection here one-on-one, but might invite you into that.
Oh God, no! That should be a you two thing for sure.
What?
I would love to listen in on that, but that's gonna be on you, Speed.
We should really invite Massimo Pigliocci in here and have him and Danny go at each other.
Oh,
I think he's one of the responders to Fodor.
That would be
fun.
Yeah.
Well, Dessel, also, by the way, I popped Dan a Twitter message and I said you wanted to discuss neutral theory, and he got like super excited. So I think you guys can have that convo at some point.
That sounds great.
By the way, Erica, you were featured in the Cell video that I went over a little bit of in the weather report, and they made a little comment. I've got it bookmarked. We might go over it on Saturday Night at the Atheist.
Oh, really? What about me this time?
Oh, that's somehow your idea that something about primates doesn't help you with evolution or some damn thing. Oh. They said they really love you, but you're so wrong about primates.
Well, they don't. Listen, I also very much I love Sal. I think Sal is great. Sal and I have known each other for quite some. I've known Sal longer than I've known pretty much anybody on YouTube, because he and I used to get into it over on Reddit. But yeah, he's got some interesting thoughts on on why humans are so similar, quote unquote, to the other.
I know. It isn't that sick what he came up with.
I
Yeah.
don't understand. I don't
really-
understand something, Erica. Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, the way that the conversation on YouTube here is developing, it's kind of humorous to me because everybody's trying to be friendly with one another while at the same time hating every word that comes out of each other. And so
That's
it's
what I
just-
was going to ask. 'Cause
yeah, it's
I find Sal to be he's very mendacious. That's the
Yeah,
polite way to put it.
I
yes.
call it. I've been calling it the war of passive aggression. That's basically what it is.
Okay. So here's my thing. I have a huge. I love when people can be civil to one another. I've got like a huge thing for civility conversation.
Civility is overrated. Nuke him from orbit.
So here's
You're
the
not
thing.
gonna like Danny.
I subscribe to this idea. That I can, with every fiber of my being, hate what someone believes and proposes and still enjoy them as a person outside of that narrow range of
I
conversation.
think you're a good argument. I don't know if you're really an ape or a primate.
So
You don't have any characteristics of a primate.
You're trying
Okay,
to draw me out.
before we close this out, Erica, could you explain Sal's theory about why we're so much like monkeys?
Unless he's changed it the last I checked, but his idea was that we needed to have a good model organism to test for human diseses. So it's this idea that they were created to be our test subjects.
Yep.
Wow, that is so special pleading, isn't it? Wow, that is amazing.
Wow.
It bums, like I say, it bums me out pretty big. But
Wasn't it sick and twisted to think about that they were created to be tortured and
it's yeah. I mean, I have not gotten the opportunity to discuss it with him yet, but I have thoughts. I certainly have thoughts.
What do you call racist against primates?
I think he'd just go speciesist. I think that's what
Speciesist or
Pongoist.
Something like that.
Pongoist. Oh my god.
Anyway, guys, you want to reassemble in about an hour so I can go get a little bit of sleep?
Yeah, get some rest, Steve.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Bye,
good
everyone.
speed.
We're going to end the broadcast. We'll see you guys.